Welcome to episode 225 of the Refuse-Fascsim podcast, a podcast brought to you by volunteers with Refuse-Fascsim. I'm Sam Goldman, one of those volunteers and host of the show. Refuse-Fascsim exposes, analyzes, and stands against the very real danger and threat of fascism coming to power in the United States, a mission whose urgency and import has exponentially increased since Trump won the election. In today's episode, we're sharing excerpts from a live-streamed forum we hosted this past Friday night, November 8th, titled, No Election Can Legitimize Fascism, No to a MAGA Fascist USA, featuring Paul Street and Andy Z, hosted by myself. Right now, this audience needs to grow dramatically. Think about all those who are reeling with grief, anguish, terror, and rage, feeling lost, alone, and hopeless. They need to find this resource and community. And we need them in the streets resisting. After you listen to the show, be sure to share it with others. Click the share button in your app to send this episode to a friend or 10, or let the world know why you listen by rating and reviewing on Apple Podcast or your listening platform of choice. We hope you'll support this pod and help us grow this audience by becoming a patron. Join the community for as little as $2 a month at patreon.com/refusefascism. So before we get to the forum, I want to speak to you directly, to your anguish over a Trump return to the White House, to your heart aching with dread and sorrow at Trump's pledge of ethnic cleansing. I want to speak to women, especially Black women who have felt your skin on fire with rage since Tuesday, to those who feel a profound sense of betrayal that tens of millions of Americans voted for a rapist responsible for stripping away your fundamental rights, who campaigned on your domination and punishment, to immigrants, those in the LGBTQ community, and everyone who is worried that the horror is inevitable and that all hope is lost. I'm not going to tell you to not feel the feelings or which feelings are right and which are wrong. I'm going to tell you that the fact that you are feeling anything at all right now, that you have not become numb, that matters. Your humanity is not lost. I'm also not going to tell you I have a 10-step action plan that is guaranteed to overcome this fascist threat, because it doesn't exist. And while together we will figure out what exact actions we will take to meet the moment to refuse fascism, there are some things I know from helping lead a movement to drive out the Trump-Pence regime from power through nonviolent, sustained resistance, and from interviewing hundreds of lawyers, activists, scholars, journalists, all dedicated to stopping fascism. So I'm going to share with you what I do know. Trump has won the election. Nearly 75 million people voted for him, over 50% of those who voted. The first Republican to win the popular vote in 20 years. He is set to take power in roughly 10 weeks. His broad movement is ready to take power and wield it against his enemies. But the future is unwritten. Their program is out in the open, and if you don't know what it is, we've got a few hundred episodes to listen to. But it has not come to pass yet. It is not set in stone. Will they be able to run roughshod over all opposition? Will the masses of decent people in this country, as full of complacency and delusion as they are, will they simply close their eyes to the horror until it comes for them? Will fascism be able to consolidate, overcoming the people, the bureaucracies, the blocks of capital wedded to the way things are, the inertia built up from decades of stability, all of which present very real obstacles? Will the cruelty of these fascists stir something in people, something that has been hidden deep for decades, that could explode into courageous resistance and visionary leadership to confront this fascism, to tear it down and throw away the foundation on which it rests? Likely, we will see some complacency and some resistance. The question is, what will spread? What will historians write about if humanity continues to be able to go forth? That's not just up to me, and it's not just up to you. It's up to all of us. This election was not like any old election. Here we had a party hell-bent on ending the very tenets of American democracy, ending even the notion of bipartisanship and compromise amongst the rulers, ending the peaceful transition of power and other cornerstones of the way this country has worked since the end of the Civil War. Now that fascists have won state power and the Democratic Party leadership has chosen to once again roll out the red carpet to them, the fascist movement that has been consistently growing over the past few decades through both Republican and Democrat administrations will have new weapons at their disposal. But the fight is nowhere near over. to fight for a fascist-free future of which there is not an unlimited window. Every moment matters. So there's some things we have no time for, and some things we need to get right to work on. Now is not a time for defeat and retreat. They are counting on us to be silenced, keeling over, immobilized by fear and grief. What they need, these fascists, is a mobilized and heavily armed minority of true believers and a cowed, politically paralyzed, fearful majority. What they are counting on is the decent people to delude themselves into any combination of the beliefs that the horror show, the fascists promise, could not come to pass, and that it is simultaneously inevitable. They are counting on you, on us, to double down on the very institutions which they've either weaponized for their aims or which they don't feel bound to. The fascists thrive on the oxygen we give them, on their ability to wreak havoc unopposed. So now is not the time for getting caught in the blame game, where we are at each other's throats blaming this or that group for Trump's victory. To the degree that blame is at all a helpful construct, it must be said that the blame rests solely on this system, not on oppressed and powerless people. Certainly not on our trans youth homies. Now is not the time for saying, "Ha ha, America, you're getting what you deserved." We must learn from the fascists to defeat them, but we must not become them. Those who will be hit by this fascist onslaught first, the most vulnerable, do not deserve this hell, this brutality and cruelty that so many of them had no say in and did not vote for. And unlike the fascists, we know nobody deserves this. Nobody deserves fascism, not even the fascists. Now is not a time for accommodating in advance to the horror that awaits in a Trump return to the White House. Now is not a time for trying to unite with those who salivate with the promise of unrestrained brutality towards the oppressed. Most urgently, dear listeners, now is not the time to accommodate or normalize Trump's MAGA fascism. Do not listen to Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party's calls to accept this, their efforts to accommodate him and his team with their transition. Don't follow their lead in accepting mass deportations, in accepting detention camps, in accepting the further erosion of abortion rights nationwide, in accepting open white supremacy. Fuck no, will we get used to a fascist USA? We mustn't wait for the brutality and cruelty to unfold. We mustn't allow ourselves to accept the unacceptable or normalize the unthinkable. No more waiting on permission for visible mass resistance or for other people to be the first. So, Sam, what is it time for, you might ask? Listen to that voice that is screaming, it's not okay. It's not going to be okay. Unless we reject this fascism, visibly and relentlessly, not giving them a fucking inch to advance their program. It's time for righteous rage, mass repudiation, and refusal. Now is the time to join together, uniting all who can be united from different backgrounds and perspectives to wage ferocious resistance against the fascist horrors that are coming. Now is the time for our righteous anger. Now is the time to turn our fear into courage and our courage into action. Visible repudiation helps us overcome fear and uncertainty. It helps build the solidarity this moment demands and is a vehicle for developing the networks we will need to defeat this fascism. Now is the time to tightly wrap our arms around not just our loved ones, but all of humanity that hangs in the balance and say, we will not let this come to pass. Now is the time to proclaim in word and deed, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. Together, we must wake the sleeping giant, the terrified, the anguished, the quietly furious through our collective action, putting our voices, our bodies, our influence, our talent, our conviction, and our courage, our whole beings behind and into refusing to accept a fascist USA. Now is the time to call everyone who opposes everything Trump and the MAGA Republic fascists stand for and what they are prepared to do, to take part in and actively build visible rejection and refusal, to organize, plan, and act. Now, urgently, right now, we need to manifest in every corner of this country throughout society. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. You can get started today by seeing some of the materials in the show notes and staying tuned for more by making sure that you follow us on social media at Refuse-Fascism and subscribe to this pod. on whatever platform you listen to. On Fridays, our listeners ask tremendous questions that we will be addressing on the pod in the upcoming weeks and on our social media platforms. I wanted to give folks a sense of just some of what the Refuse-Fascism community is wondering right now. KE in Massachusetts is wondering, how do we reconcile ourselves to living in a now openly fascist nation? Barbara in New York inquires, just how do we overcome the loss? Obviously, 2016 was the start. 2020, they armed up. 2024, they took over. Do we simply leave? Habra in California wrote, I admit I had hoped Harris would win, but this country is huge enough for racist, sexist folks who don't care if a rapist, lying criminal runs a country. What has happened to the moral compass of most Americans has shattered me the most. Anne in Minnesota asks, what types of protests and resistance are expected to counteract America's fascist future in the upcoming Trumpian 2025 on era? And Brianna in South Carolina wonders, how do I stay safe? How do I help? What do we do now? So we're going to be continuing to address those questions, and we want to keep hearing from you. So be sure to contact us. Now you'll be hearing revolutionary perspectives on why people voted for an overt racist, misogynist fascist, what the fuck this means for the future, and what's needed now. The full program is available on our YouTube channel, Refuse_Fascism, under the Live tab. Here are excerpts from my discussion with Paul Street and Andy Z. Paul Street has the Substack, The Paul Street Report, and he brings an understanding that it is the history of the US and the system we live under that has given rise to this virulent fascism. And the conversation includes Andy Z, a host of the Revolution Nothing Less show. He brings a revolutionary perspective put forward by the revolutionary leader Bob Avakian that it's, quote, time to look seriously for solutions outside and beyond the system, end quote, working for a revolution to emancipate humanity. Both Paul and Andy have been members of the Refuse-Fascsim editorial board. Here we are, November 8th, 2024. Trump has decisively won the presidential election. Unlike in 2016, he now has a popular base of support that Mussolini or Hitler could only have dreamed of. This is something that Andy brought into our last discussion. He is a fully purged and streamlined fascist party, which holds the Senate. He has an expansive political apparatus from conservative think tanks to rosters of vetted loyal political appointees who all know what they signed up for and the part they're supposed to play. He has very concrete plans for carrying out his program. He has a fascist-stacked Supreme Court that has given him immunity in advance. And now they have a popular vote, quote unquote, mandate. And this is all illegitimate. No election can legitimize fascism. It's the fascist character of Trump and the MAGA program itself, which renders it illegitimate and an immoral peril to the future of humanity and the earth itself. Biden spoke yesterday, many of you tuning in probably heard, about how he's getting ready to just hand over the keys to a fascist, which, to be fair, is largely a continuation of everything he's done since 2020. He said that we, the people, have to lower the temperature. But I'm here to tell you, it's a good thing that the country is divided. Your grief, your shock, your anger are not only righteous, but they are a seed of what needs to be done to stop this fascism. It is a very good thing that we're not all marching united towards fascism. But as it stands now, despite often good intentions, the decent people are overwhelmingly accommodating in advance to this horror show. Let's be clear, fascism was on the ballot this past Tuesday, but anti-fascism was not. Real opposition won't be found in the institutions and organizations that have brought us to this precipice. It will not be nourished by American mythologies that serve this empire, whether those myths are expressed as yearning for an illusory past or fighting for the supposed greatest democracy the world's ever seen. Real opposition will not suddenly appear out of thin air from ignoring or papering over this threat, but it can and must urgently be fought for outside those institutions and by breaking with those delusions. That's why I've spoken to around 200 experts and activists over the course of 234 episodes of the Refuse-Fascsim podcast. And that's why we're here today with Andy and Paul to discuss what the fuck just happened, why, and what's needed now from people of conscience. 70 million people voted for Donald Trump. He won the Electoral College and the popular vote for the President of the United States. His program wasn't hidden, it was out in the open. He campaigned on mass deportation, on unadulterated hate for women. He held a Nazi rally just before the election in Madison Square Garden. In almost every demographic, support for Trump has increased. After 4 years in power, full of Muslim bans and family separation, of unleashing federal forces to crack down on protests, of vitriolic attacks on LGBTQ people, and facilitating the overturn of Roe, of the violent coup attempt planned out in the open, and he has only become more unhinged since. One of the things that shocks so many decent people, and if it doesn't shock them, they're at least deeply confused and reeling as to how this happened. How tens of millions of people said yes to this overt racist, misogynist fascist. Why did this happen? I was wondering, Andy, if you wanted to start with that.
Why did so many people vote for Trump? Why did this happen? Because this is a country full of fascists and millions of more people who are okay with fascism. They're okay with women being stripped of the right to abortion in their own integrity. They're okay with the degradation of immigrants. They're okay with everything that comes with this fascist regime and the tens of millions being affected by climate change that was, yes, present under and accelerated under Biden and Harris, but will go on steroids once again under Trump. They're okay with all that as long as they're okay. But why is that the case? Why are we in a nation full of fascists? Well, because it's woven into the whole history of this country and into the foundation of this country in the capitalist imperialist system. But look, Bob Avakian, the revolutionary leader, put out a very important social media message in his series of social media messages on all platforms titled "Two Countries Within This Country." The whole damn system's got to go. This is not a time for demoralization and despair. It's a time for righteous anger and revolutionary determination. Because part of the reason we have this fascism resurgent is because of the contradictions in the system itself and how it was woven into the history of this country from slavery, beginning with the genocide of the native people, and to the very system we live under that has continued down to today. You need to get into this article, but something Bob Avakian points out in this article is that the fascists have had tremendous initiative because they represent a very powerful section of the ruling class that sees this is the way to rule, to break the previous normal ways that things happened in this country, to be able to get a different way to rule this system. Whereas the Democrats have been constantly and can do no other than to try and keep things within the bounds of the normal way this system has functioned, including that they don't want to unleash mass struggle among the very people who they have come to represent, and they're actually losing. People who have been suffering from various forms of oppression under this system. They don't want to unleash that because that might create some questions of why is it this way, and then what do we do about it? I do want to refer to a previous social message from Bob Avakian, number 101, where he says it's time to look seriously for solutions outside and beyond this system, not within the confines of the electoral system. What are the people in that one country, not the fascist country, but the other country of people who want a decent future, who care about humanity? They're being told to figure out, why did Kamala lose? Whose fault is it? And they're also being told, let's get busy for the next election. This is a losing strategy. They're being told, if you don't like the candidates, run yourself. This is no answer. We have to be outside the normal political processes, and we have to go beyond this system and fight for a radically new world, for a whole different way we could be living, a fundamentally different system. I want to say something about Bob Avakian to those people who are listening, what you have in this leader, that he's not like any of these leaders that I just was speaking of, these bourgeois leaders who try to find a way to work within the bounds of this system. Bob Avakian has developed a more scientific way to look at the world and to understand the problems we face and the solution in an actual revolution for what? To emancipate all of humanity. We have been weighed down for generations now under the weight that no other world is possible, that this is just the way it has to be. But that's not true. And if Bob Avakian, alone among the people who led and were part of the major upsurges of the 1960s, went to work to figure out and to develop a new communism, a way we could get free from all this exploitation and oppression, get on the road to emancipating humanity here and all over the world. This is very important for you to get into because we are facing a horrific situation with the Trump-Vance fascist regime, and we have to get free of this. And we're not going to get free of it by sitting around talking about 2028 or 2032 or something like that. This is way too fucking urgent for that. There is a wake-up call to people, again, not for demoralization, but for determination and ferocious struggle and the determination to overthrow this system and bring about a far better world.
There are a lot of people right now who did not expect this, who thought maybe he'd win the Electoral College, but they didn't think that he'd win the popular vote. Why did that happen, and what does this mean?
Sam, I think actually Trump's popular vote is up to 74 million and maybe heading to 80 million. So it's pretty freaking bad. Why did all these people vote for a white supremacist, misogynist, fascist? Because white supremacism is alive and well in the United States of America. It's foundational to the country, and it has stayed intact, and it's risen and fallen, and it's back again today. The whole illusion that we'd gone beyond race under Obama was just this toxic delusion that was blown away almost immediately by the Tea Party and then by the birther phenomena and then by the Trump presidency, because patriarchy and sexism are foundational to this country and are alive and well and continue to this day. The same goes for nativism and immigrant bashing. That's why we've got tens and millions of white supremacists, sexists, and fascists in the country because of capitalism in a couple of ways. One, capitalism sort of wages this constant underlying war on belief in democracy and tends to create a context within which authoritarians naturally arise on the basis of profound inequality and the constant undermining of the system's pretenses of democracy and the system's constant generation of different crises that require government intervention. But without democracy, it's with authoritarian rule. And under capitalism, that's always going to be a right-wing authoritarian, never a left-wing authoritarian. But because capitalism as a system relies on white supremacism, appropriates it, transforms it, puts it to use for its own purposes. Capitalism, imperialism as a system relies on patriarchy and misogyny, appropriates it, transforms it, puts it to its own uses. Capitalism, imperialism as a system relies on immigrant bashing and nationalism and nativism, appropriates them, transforms them, puts them to their own uses. We have an underlying capitalist system that can't let go of those things, that's dialectically bound up with those things. This underlying class rule system of capitalism is constantly stirring up and pitting people against one another as individuals, but also as groups. And it is constantly exacerbating and re-aggravating racial and gender and nationality and other kinds of divisions. Now, the Democrats are all caught up in a blame game now, and they're going after each other, and all these politicos and talking heads on cable news are getting into about why did they lose? What could they have done different? And we're hearing about how decrepit Biden was and what a terrible president he was and how he waited too long before he passed the baton on to Kamala Harris. We're hearing about what a horrible candidate Kamala Harris was, how she ran too far to the center. We're hearing from Bernie Sanders about the Democratic Party abandoned the working class, and working class has abandoned them, almost as if the Republican Party now is a working class party, which it really isn't. Then some centrists are angry at the Democratic Party for supposedly running too far to the progressive left, by which they mean identity politics. There's a lot of discussion about the role that social media plays in polarizing the country and just creating a fact-free, neo-fascist, right-wing universe where fascist values are propagated and never against any kind of challenge. I've written about the role that the mainstream media has played in normalizing the fascism of Trump by saying that the Republicans are a working class populist party and just acting like this was just a normal election when it's anything but. It is not our job to help the Democrats fix their party. I don't think it can be fixed. This shit that's going on in the world, courtesy of capitalism, imperialism, ecocide, the drift towards nuclear war, the fascism that is being spread across not just this country, but other countries, this stuff is moving way too fucking fast for people to be sitting around agonizing about whether they should be running Pete Buttigieg in 2032 and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in 2036. The Democrats didn't fight back against fascism, not because they made the wrong decisions. They could have done this or they could have done that. They can't do it of necessity because they can't function outside the boundaries of the capitalist system that requires the racism, that requires the sexism, that requires the nativism, that are all bound up with their underlying class rule system. They can't arouse people to rise up and fight beyond elections. They are horrified of the notion of people stepping outside of the quadrennial electoral candidate-centered big money electoral extravaganzas that they think they control. They are horrified of mobilizing people en masse in the streets, in the public squares, beneath and beyond these holy quadrennial election days. They are horrified of admitting that so many people in the country have gone fascist. It doesn't fit their wonderful American exceptionalist image of the United States of America as this perfect land of liberty and equal opportunity and freedom. Bob Avakian's right. America, your city on the hill is chock full of fascists. They just don't want to deal with that. And they also, by the way, don't want to deal with this underlying right-tilted slave owners, minority rule constitution from the 18th century that we're still dealing with in 2024. I realize it's been transformed in a lot of ways since and had to be updated in connection with the needs of modern American imperialism. But it's just astonishing that we're still with this insane right-tilted electoral college. We are still with this insane right-tilted, absurdly powerful and mal-apportioned Senate. We're still with this insanely lifetime-appointed Supreme Court that is put together by these undemocratically elected bodies and all of that kind of shit. And they just can't let go of that stuff. And since they can't let go of capitalism and they can't let go of the Constitution, 3 cheers for Bob Avakian's draft Constitution for a Socialist Republic of North America. Everybody needs to read that now. They need to read it quick, fast, and in a hurry. They can't drop these things, which means they can't fight back, which means we cannot rely on them. The resistance that we need against the new Amerikaner fascism cannot be about going back to the way things were. And they cannot be about trying to put the Democratic Party back in power and helping them figure out how the fuck to win in 2028 or 2032 or 2036 when the world might be a burning crisp of climate-baked nothingness or a nuclear winter hell.
I think it's really important that we are grounded in this moment that we're in and what we're actually up against. One of the things that I'm hearing is that people are really hungry for what do we do? How do we stop this? And I want to recognize that. If you're looking at what's down the pike and you're like, fuck, that is absolutely right. We do need to do something. And what we actually do has everything to do with understanding where we're at and what's not going to work now and why not. Both of you spoke to this some, but one of the things that I've been hearing from people a lot in the days since the results came in, where we survived a Trump presidency before, we can do it again. I was hoping that you could share your thoughts on what humanity faces now with a Trump return to the White House that is different. And that might be speaking to how MAGA has changed. It might be speaking to world dynamics that changed. It might be continuing on why there's no going back to normal.
Well, the first response I would have to that is we who? The kids who were separated from their parents? The women who lost their right to control their own bodies? They're not part of we? Where's your sense of justice? Where's your sense of humanity? You lost some of that during the Trump-Pence regime, and you're going to lose it all under the Trump-Vance regime if you don't understand what it is we're facing in this system of capitalism, imperialism, and how it spawned and gave birth to this malignant fascism. And it's not just got Trump's name on it. It has Trump's name on it here now, but it also is going all around the world. And you see these fascists here going over to Orban, learning from him, from Erdogan in Turkey. The capitalist imperialist system has outlived its usefulness, if it ever had any usefulness. And it spawned a movement now around the world to tighten up, to dispense with any pretenses of rights of the people, to be able to enforce the dictates of capitalism imperialism. You know, somebody wrote in the column I saw, well, wait a second, not all these people who voted for Trump are fascists. They're just trying to feed their families. They're hurting economically. Yes, they are hurting economically, but that is not the point. There's no way anybody who's halfway sentient, which means they can think and are aware, cannot know who Donald Trump is and what he does. They cannot know that he said, you see a woman walking down the street, and if you've got enough money and you're famous, you can grab him by the pussy. That's what he said 8 years ago. And everything since has made that seem like Sunday school. So you know what he is, and you're okay with that. Why? Because you're concerned with your own standard of living, but you're not thinking about all these other people around the world. The second point is you're not getting what you're facing. When Trump came into power outside the normal channels and stuff, he didn't know how the system actually worked fully. He knew that he wanted to smash it and change it in a fascist direction. But he brought in people, and this gives you some character of the man. He wanted to have his generals, people who look like generals, and they would say sir to him. But it turned out that some of these people, vicious murderers in Iraq and in wars from Vietnam up to the present, they felt that they wanted to stick by the Constitution of the United States, and they blocked him. That's all gone. All the guardrails are gone. He's put together over 4 years, while people were paying attention to the Democrats telling you how loony he was and this and that and getting all into personality questions. He put together an organization that's developed a full-out fascist program, and they're intending to do it. I just want to read you some things of what these people are saying so you get some idea of what's involved here. This is Steve Bannon says right after the election, right after he got out of jail, but after the election, Democrats and their institutions don't deserve any respect. You don't deserve any empathy, and you don't deserve any pity. You deserve what we call rough Roman justice, and we're prepared to give it to you. Nick Fuentes, a fascist leader, says to women, your body, my choice. Another one of these fascist podcasters says, women, back to the kitchen, abortions, illegal, gays, back in the closet, interracial marriage, banned, illegals, pack your bag, trannies, back to the asylums, Jesus back in our schools. We are so back. And Russell Brand says, this is the day that the Lord has made. Rejoice and be glad in it. I could go on and on with this. This is some serious shit we're facing, people. You think you're going to sit around and have a bunch of discussions about how you're going to run for Congress? What's driving the fascists? They have to succeed now. This is their time. That's why I read the Bannon quote first. The Democrats are committed to the way this system has been. And this is something that drives people crazy. There's even two conceptions of what's true and what's reality. These two positions can no longer be reconciled within the framework of this system as it's been since the Civil War. These fascists want to reverse all the gains for black people, minorities, women since the Civil War, particularly in the 1960s. This is intolerable to the fascist way of ruling this capitalist imperialist system. Things are coming to a head. It's not just that the fascists are moving in the direction they're moving. The only way at this point to really stop this fascism is to overthrow the system itself. It's only through an actual revolution that you're going to be able to go at this. The Democrats have told you over and over again, Paul quoted both of the conciliatory speeches and the collaboration speeches of Biden and Harris conceding the election to Trump. The Democrats will not and cannot fight the fascists the way they need to be fought. And how they need to be fought is we have to resist. As we've said on our site, revcom.us, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. But we also say we need and we demand a whole different way to live, a fundamentally different system. Part of why it's not the same situation is that it's not the same situation. It's not Trump 1. This is Trump 2 after 4 years of building a movement and recoiling against what the decent people in this country wanted. And they're saying, no, you will submit to us. And there will be no stopping this through normal means of protest, which we should protest. That's not that we shouldn't have protests. This is very urgent. Before this fully consolidates, we have to build a movement for a whole different way for humanity to be living a different system in this country and then throughout the world.
Andy said I quoted from the concession speeches from Biden and Kamala Harris. That's on my Substack, the Paul Street Report today. And I was just amazed at how similar these very conciliatory, we got to accept the outcome of these elections, no matter that these are Nazis that are coming into power. Very reminiscent of Obama going out the day after Trump first won in 2016 in the Rose Garden and telling everybody it's just going to be fine. It's just an intramural contest. And I look forward to passing on the baton of democracy to Donald Trump. You know, in terms of surviving and what's the difference between 2016 and 2020, well, this is worse. They've purged everyone else out of the Republican Party. The party is full MAGA. This time, Trump's coming in with a full panoply of right-wing policy organizations under the umbrella of the Heritage Foundation on board with a radical 900-page detailed blueprint for the Christian white nationalist takeover and makeover of American government and society. We're going to have full loyalty oaths and requirements for anyone getting in to the executive branch. They're going with something called unitary executive theory this time, which, by the way, the Nazis did in the 1930s, meaning that no part of the executive branch can be at all autonomous from the wishes of the dear leader. That's what unitary executive theory means. They have the trifecta. They've got the Senate. They're about to get the House of Representatives. So they're going to have all of Congress. There was a right-wing Supreme Court in 2016, but now there's a lot more of a right-wing, full-on Christian fascist Supreme Court that has gone full MAGA. And we saw that, if there were any doubts about it, with the July 1st immunity decision. That court gave Trump the green light to go ahead and run for president, despite the clear clause in the 14th Amendment of the Constitution after the Civil War that says you can't run if you engaged in an insurrection. We have 25, 26 red states, and they're redder than they've ever been. And they are little laboratories for Christian white nationalist neo-fascism, where they've been running bills against critical race theory and running bills against protests. And they've passed abortion bans in 14 different states. And Trump is talking flat out Hitlerian this time more than any time before. I think the key phrases were saying that brown-skinned immigrants are poisoning the blood of our country. That's Mein Kampf talk. Clear the Marxist vermin out of the country. That's Mein Kampf talk. The biggest threat is the enemy within, the Marxists who are supposedly stabbing the nation in the back. That's Mein Kampf talk. He's just been openly Hitlerian this time. This fucking narrative about Haitian immigrants eating dogs and cats in Springfield, Ohio, was so vile. The animalizing of your racialized others, So Noam Chomsky said, we fought with Noam Chomsky, the academic Tony DiMaggio and I, all the way up through 2020 to try and get him to admit that Trump was a fascist. And he had these idiosyncratic reasons involving an over-attachment to every aspect of classic historical 1930s fascism that was holding him back on it. But Chomsky said something very true, too, in January of 1920. He referred to Trump as the most dangerous criminal in human history. And he actually mentioned a number of things, but particularly the ecological agenda. This drill thing is an existential death sentence for humanity. We are already nearing a tipping point of potentially irreversible capitalogenic, capitalist calls climate catastrophe. It's not clear that humanity can survive another Trump term. We may be tasked with Trump-Vance regime out now as an existential necessity for the human race. A comrade in Chicago sent me a wonderful quote from the radical black visual artist Dred Scott. I want to read it. The problem, says Dred Scott, is this choice between an open, malignant, sociopathic fascist on one hand and a genocidal imperialist, Kamala, go ahead and burn children to death in Gaza, Harris, on the other hand. When that's your choice, when burning children alive in hospitals is the lesser evil, then that whole damn system's got to come down.
I want to thank Andy and Paul for bringing in different quotes and resources for people to think about along with their own analysis. What can we actually do to stop this fascist threat? We're like at 71 days until Trump would
inauguration.
Return. Thank you, Andy. What can we do? Is there anything that can be done to stop fascism from consolidating? There's some people who say it already consolidated. What is needed now from what we in Refuse-Fascism have called the decent people?
In the RevCom Corps for the Emancipation of Humanity, the slogans have been raised, and on revcom.us. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America, which is the slogan Refuse-Fascism, raised 8 years ago. But if we're serious about that slogan and we're really thinking about humanity here and all around the world, we have to be able to mount some ferocious struggle. Having made the point that this is not the same as in 2017, it's also the case that he's going to come to power and try to do things. And he's going to face, he being Trump, he's going to face a number of different kinds of problems, which we call necessity. Well, what is he able to do? How is he able to unfold this? He says he wants to deport 11 million people and use the National Guard to do that. That's going to bring about tremendous hardship, misery, death, chaos. But within that, there has to be massive resistance. But the question is going to be, resistance to do what? You're not going to back fascism down. You have to defeat it. But you're not going to defeat it the way the Democrats want to defeat it, which is to restore the old system. This society is too divided for that, and it's also, as Paul said, too late for the existential dangers that we face, the environment and the danger of nuclear war. As much as Trump tried to run as a peace candidate, the things that the U.S. imperialism is facing around the world are going to compel them to do certain things, including that he's actually got even a more horrific policy towards the Mideast even than Biden, which is almost hard to even conceive of. In this situation, we have to be part of, and people need to unite very broadly. And I want to say right now, there have to be standards in this movement where all voices are heard, where people have to be able to hear each other and listen to each other and debate what is the problem, what is the solution, how can we unite, how can we debate, and no more of this thought police in the movements of resistance. That has to be a thing of the past, or we will get defeated.
He's going to take the reins of power in 2 months. How is it possible? You just said we have tens of millions of fascists in this country. And again, the majority of people don't vote. So it's not the majority of the country is necessarily fascist, but the majority of those who voted are. So you said 75 million people thumbs up this. You know, you talk about them being a super strong social base. You talk about them wanting to eliminate the rights of protest, to round up and put in camps people on day one. How are we going to do that? And related to that, what does this ferocious struggle look like? What do you mean by that?
I wanted to come back to the fact that they don't have a big, wide highway to do everything they want to do. It's going to take some time. And I think we should talk about the situation in this country, but I'll say that if you go to a historical analogy, even after Hitler was named chancellor, it took years for it to fully get consolidated. And a big problem that was faced was what they called the good Germans, the people who went along with it because they wanted to keep their thing together and didn't resist when they actually knew what, and they said, well, we didn't know, you knew. And believe me, all these people who voted, and I don't really want to argue whether it's a third of the country or 40% of the country. That's too many people. It's a lot of people, but there actually are more decent people in this country, and they have to be organized to fight against this and to understand why it is that this fascism has come about, what's the nature of the fight, and then if there's a movement built for an actual revolution, that is going to create a lot of necessity. If we forge this with thousands of people soon, small minority thousands of people, it will create necessity for every other social force and class force to take that into account. Because what the people who are within the framework of social democracy, it's all forms of bourgeois democracy, they are going to have to respond to this. And what it's going to take to actually stop this fascism is going to be a ferocious struggle. And I think there's more of a basis in the situation today for people to recognize that. Whereas last time in the first Trump-Pence regime, there was a lot of fumbles by Trump. He did a lot of damage, as I said before, but there wasn't the kind of society-wide dislocation that we're already seeing under Biden and Harris with the Gaza war and the war in Ukraine. This was the worst possible outcome that we could have had. This was not good. It would have been one thing if Trump had won the electoral slave owners apportionment, as Paul Street put it, but he didn't just win that. He won the popular vote, and people are reeling. They're not taking to the streets. In 2017, you didn't have to tell people to take to the streets. They poured into the streets, and we attempted to lead it. But at a certain point, when people confronted the kind of struggle it was going to take even then, too many said, no, thank you. We're going to get organized for the next election. And don't worry, they're not going to overthrow Roe versus Wade. They can't do that. I know that it's a Christian fascist court, but they're not going to do that. I think this disbelief in the possibility of radical change needs to be shattered by the radical change that just happened with the election of Trump and the election by a majority of people. A lot of people voted for him. That's a radical change. That should be a wake-up call to people. You didn't expect it. It happened. There's other things that are better that are unexpected. And that's not just wishing for it, but it actually means working for it right now and getting off your behind and getting out there and going to the social media Bavavaki and reading it, going to revcom.us, checking out the Revcom Corps for the Emancipation. And in that way, we can start to forge the kind of forces that can make a revolution. Anything else, anything less is not going to defeat this fascism. But that doesn't mean that people shouldn't be out in the streets right away. I'd be thrilled if people would take to the streets right away, and we should unite. There's some protests called, but they're kind of protest as usual to prepare for the slog of the next election, from what I've been able to hear so far in the discussions that have been held online. There's people who wanted something better than that.
We've learned that when you face a regime such as this, the longer that people wait to act, the worse it is. Right now, there isn't an immediate opposition or refusal. It's many good people going inward and thinking about how they're going to take care of themselves, how they're going to take care of their loved ones, how they're going to get by in a nightmare. That's something to me that really has to be broken through. And then there's a lot of nihilism that people think that this is shit and nothing's going to come and we're done. That's a really, really dangerous mindset right now because you don't see people acting, you then feel alone, and it reinforces itself. You mentioned that there are some calls for people to protest, but we don't see people in the streets. So I feel like given the situation right now, I think he will go forward with his plan for mass deportations. I think we are kidding ourselves to think otherwise. So if, and very likely when that happens, what is required of people of conscience? Is there anything we can do?
You have sent me a lot of stuff that's coming out in the movement, and it's a lot of boo-hoo-hoo. That's why we have that slogan. This is not a time for demoralization. People are being told by Biden, the American experiment endures. We're going to be okay. We need to keep the faith. May God protect our troops. That's a quote. That's what you're being told. Kamala didn't say anything different. She just said, I'm not going to give up or something. No, she's going to not give up trying to rope you into the same old bullshit. That's what she's not giving up. But it's not just the Democrats, because I think a lot of the people, Sam, you're speaking of are not those people. They're the people who did go out after George Floyd was murdered. They're the people who did go out for abortion rights. They forget how for years pigs would kill a black or brown person, mentally disturbed person. A little bit of protest goes away. A little bit of protest, maybe a little more protest, goes away. Not that there hadn't been very significant protests around Trayvon Martin and other people. There have been very significant protests. But this George Floyd thing was something else. And almost overnight, there were millions and millions of people in the streets. At the start of the Iraq War, there was 15 million people in the streets, as I recall. One day, not in this country, in his country in Northern Africa, Tunisia, in a small city, a peddler doesn't get his license, he sets himself on fire. Within a week, the whole Arab world is in flames and people are out in the streets, but they didn't have the leadership they need. This is Paul's point about the BA social media. See, because what happened is they didn't understand they were up against a system and that the army was the key enforcer of that system. I'm going to this historical analogy because the tendency and the training people get in the social movements in this country is you fight small bore battles in a small way or even a big way, but you never question the whole thing. Or if you question it some other way in some academic setting. The time has come when this system can be put in the crosshairs of the masses of people's interests because it's objectively there. It is something I want to happen, but it's objectively there. There's a fascist regime that has taken power. Even the New York Times columnist Peter Baker has said, this is a societal change. This is who we are. Again, we who? It may be who you are. You may be so enthralled with this system that you're willing, like Biden and Kamala, to say the system endures. I say the time's up for this system, and that's what we're saying, and we need to get organized. There's no crystal ball as to how it's going to develop, but I will say this, it's not going to happen without people understanding the nature of the problem they face in the system itself, how the political setup enforces that and reinforces that system, but it does enforce it, and yes, they'll enforce it ever more brutally. Trump said, why can't we shoot people? During the George Floyd thing, he wanted to shoot people and they restrained him. They may not restrain them this time. But that's not a reason not to fight. But it is a reason to fight to get rid of the system and to do it smartly and with organization and a sense of the value of people's lives. And we have to get to a point where people see that there's a really hopeful, beautiful way we could be living in a different society such that they're disgust and anger and hatred and upset over the way things have been and the possibility of something better outweighs their fear of repression. And so they become part of a force, a movement, yes, against the fascism, but also for a revolution to emancipate all of humanity, and that a section of them get organized into a scientific discipline force to actually lead that revolution and want to take that responsibility in their heart and in their head to lead millions of people to overthrow the thing that is oppressing people in this country, yes, but it's also who's sponsoring the devastation of South Lebanon, the unbelievable situation in the West Bank of Israel, of Palestine, and in Gaza, and that is threatening the young men and women of Ukraine into a meat grinder for the interests of imperialism, and is threatening a world war with China. Come on, people, this is not any time to be boo-hoo-hoo, what about me? This is a time to start thinking about humanity. And here's the thing, if there was no way to actually do this, then, whatever will be. But that's not the case right now. It's not consolidated, yes, they don't have a free run. Trump says he's going to settle the Ukraine war in a day. I'll do that before inauguration. Well, Zelensky and the Ukraine people have something to say about that, and so do we. He doesn't have all freedom. We have the masses of people, but we have to go get them to start seeing the world scientifically and strategically and what their role can actually be.
That fear, we have to turn into some serious courage, because what this moment is calling on all of us, what the future of humanity is calling on us, is to find a courage that we didn't know that we had, and to turn that fear not inward and not swallow it, but actually take historic action. Take action that we don't see ourselves doing, that we've never done before, and imagine new ways of acting together. I think that there's always been a deprived imagination on the part of Americans on how we make change and what we do. This is a time to break through a lot of that. Okay, Sam, well, what do you mean? What I mean by that is we're going to need to do things like actually put our bodies on the line. People asked in the chat, am I talking about armed resistance? No. What I'm talking about right here in that situation is that you see trucks going to round up people in your neighborhood, you're blocking that from happening. Just as a concrete example, we're going to need to find each other. And part of how we find each other is we shift very quickly out of accommodating to a notion that we're going to live in a country that has a program of ethnic cleansing. Stop conciliating with the fact that women are subordinate, that are only baby-making machines or objects for sexual pleasure for men, and actually refuse fascism in the name of humanity, and make that not just a private sentiment, a nice slogan to end a show, something that you wear on your shirt, although you should, but something that you're acting on. And we're going to need to find the ways together to act on it. It does matter how people understand this. It has everything to do with how we fight, and most importantly, what we're fighting for. Somebody who's watching on Facebook had written, wondering your thoughts on this. It's a quote from Tom Nichols. Quote, paradoxically, however, Trump's reckless venality is a reason for hope. Trump has the soul of a fascist, but the mind of a disordered child. He will likely be surrounded by terrible but incompetent people. All of them can be beaten in court, in Congress, in state houses around the nation, and in the public arena. America is a federal republic, and the states, at least those in the Union that will still care about democracy, have ways to protect their citizens from a rogue president. Nothing is inevitable, and democracy will not fall overnight, end quote. Do you have any thoughts on that, Paul?
There's always been a kind of denial of the fascism of Trump centered around the narrative that he's not very intellectually astute. He's not a disciplined ideologue like Mussolini and Hitler, where, well, guess what? He's surrounded by people who are, the Bannons and the Millers and all of that. And now he's got the full Heritage Foundation crowd behind him. It's kind of like a thing on the liberal left to talk about how stupid the Republicans are. This happens on social media a lot. If you take a look at them, whatever their 900-page document is from the Project 25 people, the Heritage Foundation document, and all the policy wonks did, these people aren't all that stupid. And I'm not even sure how venal all of them are. They're committed right-wing ideologues. A bunch of them are graduates of Harvard and Yale Law. They can string some sentences together. They know what the fuck they're doing. They're just evil. They're Christian white nationalists who are just strongly committed to rolling back the clock in this country and building a fascist America. So we shall see if anywhere that Trump's venality and corruption trips him up, well, we're going to want to take advantage of that. Of course, in terms of the states, this came up with the abortion issue a lot. It fed this narrative that we don't need to take to the streets nationally against the Christian fascist Supreme Court because some of the states will be okay. And the problem with that is, even if that's really true, that you can effectively resist a national fascism through what's going on in your semi-autonomous blue zone states, even if that's true, it's a hell of a statement about consigning the rest of the country, the people living in the 26 or the 27 red states, to Gilead hell. So I'm just not really a big fan of that. And I'm sorry, there's a lot of stuff here where federal power is going to, no pun intended, trump state power. Pritzker here in Illinois, he's going to counter Trump trying to send in the Army and the National Guard to the west side of Chicago to end crime in one day. We're going to have a civil war. Should I enlist? Do I need to go to the enlistment station and enlist in the new Union Army being led by our blue governors? I don't think it works like that.
I don't know what this motherfucker is going to do in the next couple of days and what people are going to be awakened to. But there were some events during this election. Just think about who just won. 91 indictments, 2 impeachments, 2 assassination attempts. There's all kinds of things that can happen. I'm not advocating anything, but frankly, in July, for the turn of a head, the whole history of this summer would have been different. I don't know what's going to happen, and neither does anybody else listening here. But what I do know, and what Bob Avakian has said, is that this irreconcilable contradiction, the radical resolution of how this country is going to be run, is still up for grabs if we say what we have to say about it. If you leave it to the Democrats and you wait, then yeah, game over. They will not fight this. They will not fight it in any way that resolves this. But we have something to say, and we are hundreds of millions of people. And yes, we have to resist with everything we've got, every motherfucking move these people take. We can't let them get away with a thing.
What we began to get into tonight, these are conversations that we need to be having. Somebody said something about, how do I talk to my friends or family? This is how we ask each other these questions. We work with the understanding that we have, and then we look for the answers. We don't know everything. And we don't actually know even what resistance needs to look like. We do need action before the consolidation happens. We do need people to be refusing now, not later, the fact that fascists will have state power in the most powerful and dangerous country in human history. We will need to do that. But figuring out what action we need to take without having conversations like this is extremely dangerous and will lead to failure. I just want to put that out there. And that doesn't mean that we don't need to talk about what it means to unite all who can be united to resist, to refuse fascism in the name of humanity. I want to thank again, Paul and Andy, for joining me. I want to thank you all for tuning in, for sharing your questions, your disagreements, your appreciations, your overall engagement. The resources that you were sharing, it all mattered. You can read more from and stay connected with Paul via his Substack, The Paul Street Report, which is paulstreet.substack.com. And you can find Andy over on the YouTubes at youtube.com/therevcoms. They air their show on Thursdays at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Find resources in the show notes to spread mass rejection through the slogan, "In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America." Let us know how you are bringing that out in real life. Tag us in any photos, video, or send us an email. You can write me directly, Samantha Goldman at refuse-fascism.org. If you appreciate this show, this analysis, if you know more people need to be hearing and joining Refuse Fascism, please consider making a generous donation today and becoming a patron or sharing this show with others. To do so, you can donate at refusefascism.org by hitting the donate button, or you can become a monthly supporter, making this show possible by visiting patreon.com/refusefascism. You can give as little as $2 a month. It all makes a difference. Thanks for listening to Refuse Fascism. As always, please share the show with others, rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen, or comment on our social posts or YouTube uploads. Of course, follow, subscribe wherever you listen so you never miss an episode. Now is the time we really need to be talking with and working with each other. Be sure to find us on social media at Refuse Fascism. On YouTube, refuse_fascism. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if YouTube is your thing, or leave us a voicemail. See a link in the show notes. If you want to reach me personally, you can do so over at Twitter at Sam B. Goldman. As I said before, you can drop me a line via email at SamanthaGoldman@refusefascism.org, or find me on the TikToks at Sam Goldman RF. Thanks to Mark Tinkelman, Richie Marini, and Lena Thorne for helping produce this episode. Thanks to the R&L Show, who helped do the forum and helped us with Andy's audio and visuals. Shout out to them. And thanks to incredible volunteers. We have transcripts available for each show. So be sure to visit refusefascism.org and sign up to get them in your inbox. Until next Sunday, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America.